Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and welcome to a really special edition of Life, Liberty, and Levin. Tonight, I want to share with you some of the critical discussions we've had so far this short year with patriots like Chris Rufo, Colonel Richard Kemp, and Stephen Miller. But we begin with America's wise man, as I call him, Victor Davis Hanson, and the Democrats' deliberate attempts to destroy our country. Go. It's always an honor and a pleasure to have Victor Davis Hanson with us. Very brave intellectual, because most intellectuals like to hide unless they're attacking the United States, and he's certainly not one of them. You know, Victor Davis Hanson, you were really among the first to take on this issue of illegal immigration, the lack of assimilation. You wrote a book on it. Many years ago, it was even cited by then the late Democrat governor of Colorado, Richard Lamb. I don't feel like we have Democrats like that anymore. What's happening on the border, the inhumanity, the mayhem, the effects on all aspects of American society, this isn't an accident, is it, sir?
No, it isn't. It's deliberate, and the message has gone out. It's not just to Latin America, Mark. It's all over the world that you're not only allowed to come in here illegally, but this administration wants you to. And they will slur or smear anybody who objects and call them racist or advocates of the Great Replacement theory. But they've written, advocates of the open borders have written books. They're not shy about it, called Demography is Destiny or The New Democratic Majority. They feel that their agenda doesn't appeal to people on the issues, crime, the border, foreign policy, inflation. So they need new constituents, or at least they want to grow government by having a lot of people who need to be on entitlements. And then we have the problem with Mexico. I mean, Obrador is really out of control. He just gave us a demand, Mark. He said he wanted, in addition to the $60 billion in remittances that he gets from people here illegally, that most of them are getting subsidized by our government to free up the cash to send to Mexico. He says he wants $20 billion. And then in addition to that, he wants amnesty for 10 million people here. And then he wants us to recognize fellow socialist, communist governments like Venezuela and Cuba. So there's no respect for us anymore. And they interpret our magnanimity as weakness to be exploited, not to be reciprocated.
It's almost as if they have listened to Joe Biden's treatment of Israel, told Israel what its country should look like, has told Israel how it should fight a war, has told Israel about the Palestinians, and so forth and so on. It's almost as if the president of Mexico is taking a page out of Joe Biden's foreign policy. Now, let me ask you this, Victor. The consequences on this society, even if today we were to secure the border, are monumental, are they not, given that millions and millions of people, many of whom have not been vetted, who have not been properly identified, have now been dispersed throughout our country?
Absolutely. I live in a community that is impacted by it. You can see it every day. And people who rely on social services for things like diabetes treatment or kidney dialysis, things like that, the social services are swamped. And the irony is that we're treating people who are here illegally and reside unlawfully, we're treating them better than citizens. We're emptying schools out so they can occupy these schools as quarters, and then the students are deprived of person-to-person teaching experiences. And it's crazy that the citizen is secondary to the illegal immigrant. We got rid of 8,400 people out of the military because they didn't want to get a mRNA vaccination. Many of them had herd immunity, and yet we don't ask any of these people, have you been vaccinated? What's your health records? It's almost, I mean, if you wanted to really destroy America, it would be hard to think of a better way to do it than just invite 8 to 10 million people, and that's what's going to come during the Biden administration, to invite them in without any audit or background or with any means of support, and especially with the attitude that they have no respect for the host. It's like going to a person's home and saying, you know what, I don't like this and I don't like that, and here's my conditions by which I'll stay as your guest. And we've got it all wrong. We need to really, psychologically especially, change our attitude. And I don't know how we're going to rectify the 8 to 10 million who will have come by 2024, the end of the year, but it's going to be very difficult for the next decade or two.
You know, you made a very important point about replacement theory and such thing. It's not a theory. It's an ideology, and it's an ideology of the Marxist left and the Democrat Party. they do want to change the citizenry to accommodate their ideological viewpoint, because red-blooded American citizens of all backgrounds, all faiths, and all colors aren't buying into this. And so they figure, okay, then we'll change the citizenry. We lord over the citizenry. We want to re-engineer the citizenry. Isn't this the bottom line with the progressive ideology anyway? To create what they consider a more perfect human being in society? Isn't this why they actually supported eugenics 110 years ago?
Absolutely. We have an all-time high. We have 55 million people that were not born in the United States, and we don't know what statuses they all are. In California, 27% of the resident population wasn't born in the United States. That's an enormous challenge for assimilation and integration, and we don't do that anymore. We give them DEI. The moment they come in, they have a grievance against the United States on basis of DEI, and that's not going to work. We've got to go back to the melting pot and junk the salad bowl. We really do, and very rapidly.
We see what's going on our streets, in our colleges and universities, really un-Americanism, supporting actually terrorist organizations, Marxist organizations. Isn't this all part of the same milieu? The open borders, academia, the Democrat Party, and so forth?
Yeah, I think the common theme, Mark, is it's equality of result, mandated government equality, and hatred of people who are successful or that try to work hard and they follow customs and traditions of the United States, so that they don't like those people. And you know, I don't think they realize that we're the only multiracial democracy in history that's ever worked. India is trying it, Brazil's trying it with very mixed results. It's a very fragile idea, and to make it work, you have to have everybody accept a common culture. Their superficial appearance has to be incidental. It can't be essential to who you are. And you know, we keep saying diversity, 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 but historically, there's no society that was very successful being diverse by emphasizing diversity. I mean, the Balkans didn't work, Iraq hasn't worked, Rwanda hasn't worked, so we've got to junk this whole idea that diversity, 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 and get back to unity, 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 and say that, you know, our individual differences are just incidental compared to our common Americanness. And we really got to get back to civic education. I don't think people died on Iwo Jima or at Shiloh for this dream of what America's becoming. That wasn't the purpose of, you know, all these prior generations. And we've got to stop defaming the dead and suggesting that our generation and their infinite wisdom and morality can pass judgment with our current morality on people who really built the country in the past and defame them like we do. It's really amoral to do that, and yet that's institutionalized in our colleges and schools.
And you know, Victor, when I look at some of the leading voices against this country, I think to myself, what the hell have you ever contributed to this country? What the hell have you ever done for this country? You're ideologues who are trying to destroy what men and women, our ancestors, have built. And it's a new thing what this generation is doing, no?
Absolutely. I live in California, and this generation is so self-righteous, and I say to myself, what have you done? Have you improved the University of California system that was built by your grandparents? Have you added to the California Water Project? How is high-speed rail going? Why do we have now a 14% income tax rate on the rise? And look at the state. Is it cleaner? Does it have better law enforcement, better education? The answer is no. And yet they defame these prior generations that are now dead and can't answer back. And, you know, they look at history as melodrama, that there's going to be an oppressor and oppressed, not as tragedy. None of these people, Mark, if they had to go on the Oregon Trail without water and dealing with disease and horses and wagons to get to Oregon or California, like our pioneer great-grandparents did, they wouldn't make it. And yet they're so self-righteous, and they're completely unaware that some future generation is going to look back at us and say, my God, you had millions of homeless people defecating on the sidewalk. You had over 1 million abortions a year. You had institutionalized anti-Semitism in your so-called great universities. Shame on that generation. We're going to be judged pretty harshly, and that's going to be pretty ironic, but I think it's well-deserved.
You know, your great area of expertise is more ancient history, I would argue. You look at Athens, you look at Rome, and yet they didn't survive. But Rome survived as a republic for what, about 500 years? We're not even at 300 years. How are we doing compared to Rome?
I think we were doing pretty well until about 2 or 3 generations ago. And the problem that these societies in antiquity had is that they get complacent and they don't echo the values or maintain or embody the values that made them great when they were poor and struggling. And they get complacent, and affluence and leisure, not dearth and want, is what destroys civilization. So we need to get back to the very basics. We got to say to ourselves, how did they do this in 1850, 1920, 1960? What were the ingredients? Hard work, equality of opportunity, not of result. They got to the point where race was not a factor anymore in admissions or hiring. They were meritocratic. They told people all over the world, come to the United States. It's the only place where liberty and freedom are at a higher standard than mandated equality. So we can do it. We just have to remember who we were.
Yeah, we just need a new ruling class, that's for sure. Victor Davis Hanson, thank you for everything you do. You're very, very important to liberty in this country. Up next, Chris Rufo, one of America's rising young stars. Well, he revealed to me the shocking evidence of the Marxist indoctrination that is spread through higher education like a virus. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this special episode of Life, Liberty, and Levin. My buddy Chris Rufo recently joined me to expose the radical Marxist ideology being pushed today in our colleges and universities. Now, these revelations are astounding. Go. Honestly, one of my scholarly heroes is Christopher Rufo. This guy has guts. This guy has brains. He knows how to communicate. He has ripped this badge off of what's going on in this country with this American Marxist movement that has insinuated itself into the worst places, our educational system. He's with the Manhattan Institute, the City Journal. I want to welcome you. Happy New Year, Christopher Rufo. Now, you were really taking a very close look at the former president of Harvard, who will now be a multimillionaire faculty member, Claudine Gay. And you and a colleague of yours helped expose her plagiarism. Are you surprised by the extent to which the American media, so-called civil rights leaders, and academia generally has come to her support like a Praetorian Guard?
I'm not surprised at all, because Claudine Gay was the symbol of the DEI regime that has conquered American academic life. They prioritize race and sex, or ancestry and anatomy, over scholarly merit, over fairness, over equality, over every other principle. And so the left had to come to her defense because she represented the top prize. And that's why I fought so hard, both exposing the plagiarism and also putting pressure on Harvard to topple her, because I knew that we were going to expose their contradictions. We were going to make it very uncomfortable. And we ultimately forced them to make a choice. Was Harvard going to prioritize truth or racialist ideology? Ultimately, it became untenable because donors, the American people, and political leaders like Elise Stefanik said that it was not going to be possible for them to continue as they did. And very thankfully, as the beginning of this campaign, certainly not the end, Claudine Gay is now gone. We've exposed the DEI regime, and there's much more to come.
Much more to come. Apparently, Barack Obama had an invisible hand behind this, and I suspect there's a lot of people on the radical political left and in academia who've been working behind the scenes under the radar to defend her and promote her. But she's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't she? Isn't it the fact that Harvard and so many of these universities have a rotten culture within now, that the way faculty hires faculty, the way faculty hires administrators and presidents, this is all incestuous. So this is the tip of the iceberg, and we really need to dig in further.
That's 100% right. I think that Claudine Gay, of course, is the kind of top symbol, the highest academic official in American universities as the president of Harvard. But by no means is she the exception. And so what I'm going to be doing in the weeks and months going forward is digging into the academic work of other top administrators and scholars and professors at the Ivy League universities to find out exactly how far the rot goes. And we're going to be exposing people who are not living up to these standards, and then showing the American people, who, by the way, give billions of dollars of taxpayer funding each year to to these universities, that they should no longer submit, they should no longer simply kowtow to the supposed expertise at places like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, even Georgetown, but in fact they should trust their own intuitions, and they should demand that political leaders stop writing a blank check to left-wing racialist ideologues that hate American principles and that hate the taxpayers that subsidize their salaries.
And isn't the reaction to all this evidence that these people hate merit, they hate real competition, that they really are advancing a hardcore, in my view, Marxist ideological agenda? I mean, some of the people Gay stole from were black. She stole from Carol Swain, yet Carol Swain doesn't get the kind of laudatory coverage that Gay does, and yet Gay stealing from Swain for her writings and so forth. And she's not the only minority that Gay stole from. How come Jake Tapper, how come Al Sharpton, how come Joe Scarborough, how come none of them are coming to the defense of people who had their intellectual property stolen from them and then used as a lie to create, in effect, Claudine Gay's so-called scholarship?
Well, for two reasons. One, because Carol Swain, the great black scholar, former professor at Princeton and then Vanderbilt, is a conservative. She believes in colorblind equality. She opposes affirmative action. And so among left-wing scholars, both black and white, Carol Swain is an apostate. She's a defector from this ideology. She has to be put away. She has to be denied and ignored. And so it's totally justified in their view for someone like Claudine Gay to steal from Carol Swain. And the second thing, I mean, you know, to be blunt about it, the same kind of principles that you see in black-on-black violence in inner cities, you see in this black-on-black plagiarism at Harvard. It's totally excused because it doesn't fit in with the left-wing narrative that, according to critical race theory, for example, only whites or whiteness can serve as an oppressive force, and all crimes that take away from the power of the supposed white power structure should not only be forgiven, but they should be actually encouraged, subsidized, and justified. And so I'm not surprised at all. We've seen that Harvard sacrificed its core principles on the altar of DEI, and whoever's hurt, whether it's Carol Swain, whether it's the great Professor Ronald Sullivan or Roland Fryer. These are black professors at Harvard who were trashed and tarnished by Claudine Gay. All of that is forgiven because Claudine Gay is a reliable and dutiful servant of the DEI regime.
When we return, a dear friend, Colonel Richard Kemp, warns us about the nefarious connections between China, Iran, and yes, the United States. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. Today, I'm bringing you some of the most important conversations we've had so far this year on Life, Liberty, and Levin. We turn now to our friend Colonel Richard Kemp, former commander of British forces in Afghanistan, to examine the Biden regime's detrimental foreign policy. Go. Something very strange is happening. The Communist Chinese are providing weapons to Hamas through Iran. The Russians are working with Iran to provide weapons too. And apparently the United States government's providing tens of billions of dollars to Iran to try and appease Iran, which apparently doesn't believe it should be appeased because it's attacking American forces through its surrogates. Is this the most insane foreign policy you've ever seen?
Well, let's not forget another thing that you didn't mention about weapons, and that is that Iran has been supplying for more than a year now, has been supplying huge numbers of attack drones to Russia to attack Ukrainian civilians. And you know, again, that's also an attack on the United States because Ukraine is an important US ally at the moment. So Biden is funding Iran not just to attack against Israeli targets and against Russia. He's also providing funds for Iran to carry out attacks against shipping in the Red Sea. We've got attacks from Iraq against US forces, over 100 attacks by Iranian-controlled militias in Iraq and in Syria against US forces since this war began in Gaza 3 months ago, and many more before that. He's supplying funding for Iran to build up a base of attack in Syria so that the Syrian militias under Iran's control can attack Israel, and they've already been trying that. Not forgetting, of course, probably the greatest threat Israel faces today, again, Iran-controlled, is the Hezbollah terrorist group in Lebanon, who have been intensively attacking Israel since this war began. So it's a criminal act, in my view, for President Biden to continue to appease Iran. Iran is behind all of these problems. Iran needs to be dealt with far more severely than it is now. It doesn't need to be appeased, it needs to be attacked. Now, I don't necessarily say a military attack is necessary right now, but certainly very heavy sanctions need to be applied against Iran. But unfortunately, that's not President Biden's style. He wants to appease Iran, like you mentioned, Neville Chamberlain. He has a similar kind of policy, except worse. And I believe that policy, which included the absolutely chaotic and humiliating withdrawal of the United States and NATO from Afghanistan in 2021, prompted and encouraged Putin to invade Ukraine. And I think that's why we've got that Ukrainian war now, because he knew Biden is a soft touch. And that's why we're not seeing any cessation of the attacks against shipping in the Red Sea. Those Houthi militias in Yemen should have been dealt with by now. They should have been dealt with very, very severely. If nothing else, obviously it's required to facilitate global trade along the Red Sea and through the Suez Canal, which is a critically important artery. But it's also, it could be, if he did it, a very strong message to Iran as well. Perhaps a message that would encourage Iran to allow Hezbollah to be pushed up to the north, which President Biden and the French are allegedly trying to achieve through diplomatic means. I don't think that's going to work. I think the language of the Middle East is not diplomacy, it's force. It's not the same language we might like to use, but it's the language that needs to be used. And if we don't see a stronger line from the US on this, we will almost certainly, well, I wouldn't say almost certainly, I would say we certainly see a very intensive war campaign in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah, because Israel's got to deal with Lebanese Hezbollah. For the last 3 months, I've been staying in a hotel in Tel Aviv with a large number of refugees from northern Israel who cannot go home because they are fearful of a 7th of October style attack launched by Hezbollah from southern Lebanon into northern Israel. That problem has to be dealt with. The world has changed after 7th of October, and I think it's time President Biden recognized that.
It's an irony, isn't it, and a bad irony, Colonel, that the person who's expanding the war in the Middle East is Joe Biden and his policies. He's the one expanding the war in the Middle East. And I have grave fear that the communist Chinese are over. In their country, they're watching all this, and they're saying if the United States can't even defend the navigable routes in the Middle East from the Houthis, for God's sakes, they're certainly not going to be able to defend the South China Sea or an invasion in Taiwan from the second most powerful military on the face of the earth. I think this is going to get worse before it gets better. Next, former senior advisor to President Trump, Stephen Miller. He reveals how our country would be drastically safer if just one thing was under control, our southern border. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. Under President Trump, our southern border was the most secure it had been in decades. Biden's insane no borders policy has affected all of our lives and directly led to the rise in fentanyl deaths and sex trafficking and slavery. Stephen Miller has great insights into the disaster going on at the southern border. Go. Stephen Miller, just how badly has Joe Biden destroyed our border, immigration, our national security, and all that goes along with it within our culture and society?
No nation in modern history, Mark, that I can think of has self-inflicted a wound so grave and so deep as what Joe Biden has done to our border. The events that are happening now on our border typically take place after suffering a crippling military defeat. In other words, to lose territorial sovereignty, territorial integrity to that degree, to have that fully erased of a border, normally would have to be prefaced by losing a major military conflict to the point where your army has been battered into submission. Yet all of this has been done voluntarily, willfully, deliberately. Look, there's some numbers that we all know, right? They say they've apprehended about 8 million illegal aliens. The vast majority of them released into the country. We know there's at least another 2 million or so gotaways. But there's another group that we don't know anything about which are the unknowns. These are individuals that don't come up on sensors, that we don't have obvious intelligence across the border. That's an even larger number than I would assume the known gotaways. And so now you're looking at well over 10 million illegal aliens from over 150 different countries during just a 3-year time period. The whole state of Montana is 1 million people. So what are the effects of this on society? Look, you know, Mark, because this has been your life's work, how hard is it to inculcate in people the traditions and values of constitutionalism? How much work is involved in raising up any one individual person in this way of thinking? Now we have 10+ million people who are not schooled or trained in our Constitution, in our system of government, in our way of life, and whose first act upon entering this country was the willful commission of a crime continued every day thereafter by stealing Social Security numbers, working illegally, stealing identities, and evading law enforcement at every single step. So now you have a situation where the country is being changed socially, culturally, constitutionally, in nearly irrevocable ways. Then you look at the impact on our public school system, where you have school districts that have 12, 24, 3 different languages being spoken, where students who are already behind because of the pandemic cannot get the instruction, the care they need. Then you have housing costs spiraling out of control, struggling to keep up because these individuals are coming in out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden, where are they going to live? Where are they going to sleep? Where is there going to be a roof over their head? Then the public safety component. You have an open door to the world's criminal cartels and gangs. Every foreign gang, every transnational gang in this country can now bring in an unlimited number of additional recruits to replenish their ranks. Again, you, Mark, having worked in a background of criminal justice, understand to put one gang member in prison requires how many hours of investigation, how many search warrants, how many wiretaps, a jury trial, how much work to just get one gang member in prison. 5, 6, 7 years of work of the government to get one person behind bars. One day on Joe Biden's open border, you can bring in 10, 50, 100, 200, 500 brand new recruits to backfill. Then you look at the impact economically. A stable middle class is the essence of the American dream and the essence of a stable American society. When you have millions of low-wage workers who are unskilled, who oftentimes are not literate in their own languages, coming into a job market, you drive down wages, working conditions, and job opportunities for everybody, including recent immigrants who've arrived legally in the past 5 or 10 years. So now they're not joining the middle class. Now their children aren't joining the middle class. This creates enormous instability, economic instability, social instability, cultural instability. What fills that void? Well, that's where the Democrats come in with the welfare state. That's where the Democrats come in with redistributionist scheme and socialist economics, and then teaching people to hate the very system that they entered into in this country, albeit criminally in this case. So in every sense, it breaks down the pillars, the rafters, the structures holding up American society. And of course, Mark, that is all by design.
This is not replacement theory. This is replacement reality. And Marxists and other leftists on college campuses, professors have written about this. And they condemn the white Europeans for settling this country. And that white Europeans are actually the illegal aliens. And every other person in the world, particularly in our hemisphere, who wishes to come to the United States, they are the indigenous peoples. So why do Biden, the Democrats, and their media pretend they're actually not doing what they're doing? If they're doing something else, do they mind explaining it to us? Because I cannot even think of another rationale for allowing over 10 million foreigners in this country, most of whom aren't vetted, and many of whom are dangerous.
Well, Mark, once again, I mean, you've asked exactly the right question. Is there another explanation? Of course there isn't another explanation. If there was, they would be saying it. They'd be saying, oh, no. We have a very straightforward reason for releasing on demand any illegal alien who shows up at our border and resettling them in their destination city of choice. They have been open for years. I mean, I grew up in Southern California, and I can remember from the age I was in high school especially, that the left talked openly about the fact that they saw mass illegal immigration as a social justice endeavor to reduce the voting and economic power of the descendants of the people who founded and settled this country, and to bring in people that were the victims in their mind of European colonialism and European conquest and Western expansionism. And they were very open about this and have been for so many years. And so you'll just have to excuse me for being outraged to now have major corporate media figures saying, oh, it's some kind of conspiracy theory that there's some sort of demographic or other goal to having a wide open border. I mean, they've been saying it for years. This, Mark, isn't a disparagement of any individual migrant or any individual person of whatever country they may come from. It is just a simple statement of fact about the world in which we are living. We are living in a world in which the Democratic Party believes that it will be more powerful well into the future if it imports a new electorate.
After the break, how far down will the Biden regime allow our economy to fall?